Welcome back one and all to History with Hilbert. Now this video is going to be the first in a two-part series about Cyrus the Great, and the reason I'm making this video is because it was requested quite a long time ago now, for which I have to apologise, by Matt, who responded to a video in which I asked what would you like to see on the channel, and this was one of the responses I got for what people would like to see me make a video about. And in this one, as I said, it's going to be about Cyrus the Great, because I think Matt suggested that I do a video about the Achaemenid Empire, about the Persians, so that's what I'm going to be doing in this one. It's also the third day of the History with Hilbert Christmas gift series, in which I upload a video every single day leading up to Christmas Day as a Christmas present to you all, as a thank you for your support and for your kindness on the channel. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so this region of Persia, which I mentioned, it's sort of the modern day region of Iraq, of Iran, and the countries in the Middle East. Now, around 4000 BC, we start to see the first settled communities of farmers. And this is a shift from the traditional hunter-gatherer way of life, nomadic, moving from place to place, to farming communities, which means when you're farming the land, obviously, you can't be moving around because you've planted crops, so you have to stay in the same place. So around 4000 years ago, 4000 BC, sorry, we start to see the first settled communities in parts of Persia, which is modern-day Iran. Now, during the Iron Age, we start to see the first cities. So, 4000 BC, we start to see the first settled communities. 3000 BC, so in the span of about 1000 years, these communities have grown, they've expanded into the first cities which start to appear in this region. Now, during this time, these cities would grow, and then they might link up with another city and form, say, a city-state, so that they would both come under the collective rule of one body of people or of one man. And then these might be conquered by another group of cities, and that's how kingdoms start to form and empires. And throughout this period, we start to see empires rising and falling throughout Persia. For example, Babylon would be one of these empires. And during the 8th century BC, we see the large Babylonian Empire that actually starts to go into decline. It starts to become less powerful, with some of the further edges of the empire starting to break away, starting to rebel. So the Babylonian Empire during the 8th century is starting to lose power. And as such, in the year, or around the year at least, 625 BC, we see that the nomadic Medes, or Medes, start to settle, and they actually found the Median Empire, which is then a rival empire to the Babylonians. And in around the 7th century, we get this king called Achaemenes. And he's the king of Anshan, which is a small kingdom in, I think, modern-day Iran. Although it's very possible that he was actually invented, that he never actually existed. And we see this quite a lot in history, especially also with Ragnar Lothbrok. There's this whole theory that he might not have existed, and that he's simply been invented by these later Norse warlords who can say, well, look, we descend from Ragnar Lothbrok, who's this king, which gives us right to rule. One of these rulers who comes to power in around 600 BC also claims descent from this king Achaemenes, and his name is Cyrus. Now, the name Cyrus comes from the Greek word kuros, or from the Persian kurush, meaning the sun. And we see that a lot in history, that, for example, like Louis XIV of France called himself the Sun King. And emperors who are feeling very great or big for their boots will often call themselves the sun, because they see themselves as being the brightest star in the center of the universe, of the world around them. Now, what we know about Cyrus is very little, especially about his early life, but we do know that his father ruled Anshan, the same kingdom that the king Achaemenes also ruled, and that his maternal grandfather ruled Media, the kingdom of the Medes, who I mentioned earlier. Now, another thing we know about his early life is that at some point, his grandfather, who was obviously the Median Empire, sent his general Harpagus to invade Anshan and basically to get rid of Cyrus. However, Harpagus actually writes to Cyrus warning him of this coming invasion, and then he defects from his granddad, from the Median Emperor, to Cyrus's side to join him. Now, Cyrus and Harpagus then fight the Medians for 3 years before finally defeating them. The reason we do know this much is that it's all been written down in the Nabonidus Chronicle, which is a source written at the time in nearby Babylon, which I mentioned as well being a kingdom, an empire, in decline, although they did write things down, which is why we know about Cyrus the Great and his war against his grandfather's kingdom, the Medians. After being victorious, Cyrus actually goes on to marry his aunt, which seems very strange to us today in the 21st century, but back in the ancient world it was very commonplace practice to marry someone you were related to even closely. For example, Cleopatra actually married her half-brother. And the reason for this wasn't because they were particularly into incest or anything like that. It was rather because it was more of a political move rather than a romantic one. And Cyrus's reason for marrying his aunt was to strengthen his ties with several of the ethnic groups within his new empire. Because remember, Cyrus has gone on to beat his grandfather, who was the emperor of the Medes. And the Median Empire was very large, which I will show you in a minute. And in this large empire, you have all these different ethnic groups. And to keep them all under control and to keep them all happy, Cyrus has to go on and make sure he's representing all of them and make sure that he's keeping them all happy. And his aunt, I think, was a mixture of quite a lot of these different ethnic groups. And by marrying her, for example, he pacifies the Bactrians, the Parthians, and the Sargatians, to mention a few of these ancient peoples who he is now controlling. As I said, Cyrus now comes to control a very large amount of territory. I've highlighted here the area of Anshan, which is what he started with, the original kingdom, which came back from the king Achaemenid. And we start to call this empire, along with obviously the Median Empire, which he took over from his grandfather with the help of the defecting general Harpagus, we start to call this collectively the Achaemenid Empire. In the west, Cyrus's new empire borders on the kingdom of the Lydians. And the Lydians have an ambitious king. His name is Croesus, and Croesus wants to expand the Lydian territories further westward. And he does this by actually invading Cyrus's territory and by besieging the city of Pteria. But Cyrus marches his army out to meet him, and they do battle outside Pteria, but they fight each other to a stalemate. And now Croesus, he retreats back to Sardis, which was an important settlement at the time, and he also sends out messengers to get allied troops in support for the coming war against Cyrus and the Achaemenids. However, Cyrus isn't one to let this go, and Cyrus actually follows him into Lydian territory and besieges Sardis. Now the Lydians sally forth and they do battle with Cyrus outside of the city at the Battle of Timbra. Now we're going to take a look at some of the figures for this battle, and these are the figures according to Xenophon. So he says that Croesus had over 400,000 troops, 300,000 of which would have been Babylonian, Lydian, Cappadocian and Greek, 60,000 cavalry among them, and also 120,000 Egyptian support soldiers who I believe were allies of the Lydians during this era. And they also had 300 Egyptian chariots. And also another advantage that we shouldn't underestimate is that they were fighting on home soil. They were fighting outside the city of Sardis, which is Lydian territory, so they knew the lay of the land. Now, Cyrus has under 200,000 troops, which is significantly less than Croesus. Around 50,000 of these would have been Persians, and 10,000 of these would have been elite infantry and cavalry. The other 130,000 would have been made up of Arabian, Armenian and Median infantry, as well as 300 chariots and other specialist troops included. When you're comparing them like this, you can really see that Cyrus is gambling a huge amount on attacking Croesus and his Lydian forces outside Sardis, because Croesus clearly has the much larger advantage. But it's actually Cyrus's general Harpagus who gives him the key to victory. As any of you will know who have played Rome Total War, camels rout cavalry 10 times out of 10. And it's pretty true for the ancient world. And in Cyrus's army, he has 300 of these camel cavalry. And a quick note about when I'm saying camel cavalry, I really mean dromedary, because camels are the ones with 2 humps who are from Mongolia, that sort of area, and dromedary are these ones with just the 1 hump found in this region. But camel cavalry, it's alliteration, it sounds cool, so I'm sticking with camel cavalry for this video. And you might be thinking, 300 camel cavalry, what's that going to do against 400,000 well-trained Egyptians and Lydians? Well, you've got to remember that that's the trained amount of cavalry, the actual warriors on camels, as you can see here. But back in the day, the way that they moved around with the army, the supply train, they were all camels. So in actuality, he's got lots and lots of camels in his army supply train. And this is what he is going to try and use to defeat the Lydians outside the city of Sardis. Now, I'm afraid you're going to have to join me for part 2 if you want to find out if trick worked with the camels. Will Harpagus and Cyrus be able to defeat King Croesus and the expansive Lydians, or will the Persian Empire be driven to dust? Join us again tomorrow for more History with Hilbert, Cyrus the Great, Part 2.